You cut out the sugar, you started training, you stopped eating late, even on the weekends, even when it was hard, and the weight around your middle has not moved. So you assume the answer is more. More discipline, more cardio, fewer calories. Here is a different possibility, and it is the one researchers keep landing on. The thing working against you may not be your diet at all. It may be a hormone that rises every single morning in every single person within minutes of your eyes opening. It is called cortisol. It is not a flaw and it is not a disease. It is supposed to be there, but there is a version of it that behaves badly, and the routine we are going to look at was built, deliberately or not, around keeping it calm. Cortisol has a schedule. The endocrinology literature has a name for the morning part of it, the cortisol awakening response, and the measured pattern is consistent across studies. Within roughly half an hour of waking, cortisol climbs by around 50%. Researchers describe that climb as functional. It is understood to be what lifts you out of sleep, raises blood sugar, and gets you upright. Nobody in that literature is arguing it should be removed. The trouble, according to the research, is what happens when that rise goes higher than it needs to or refuses to come back down. The journal Obesity carried a study reporting that people whose morning cortisol ran high also tended to carry more fat around the abdomen specifically, not fat in general, abdominal. The proposed explanation is that a body reading its environment as persistently threatening starts treating stored energy around the organs as insurance, a padded layer held in reserve. Worth being precise here, that is an association the researchers observed, not a proven mechanical chain, and the effect described is modest, but it points somewhere useful. If the driver is hormonal, then the tools most people reach for are aimed at the wrong target. You cannot do enough sit-ups to argue with an endocrine signal. Which raises an obvious question. Is there anywhere that already does this well? Japan is the usual example, and the reason is population level rather than anecdotal. Its recorded obesity rate sits among the lowest in the wealthy world. There is no supplement behind it and no proprietary program. What gets pointed to instead is a set of ordinary morning habits, most of them centuries older than any of the science now used to explain them. What they share is a direction. Every one of them lowers the intensity of the first hour of the day rather than raising it. There are 5. The first is azanomizu, morning water. Consider what actually happens in most kitchens at 6 in the morning. The kettle goes on, and coffee is the first thing to enter the body. After 7 or 8 hours without fluid, that body is already mildly dehydrated, and caffeine is a stimulant arriving on top of a cortisol peak that is already climbing on its own. Andrew Huberman, the Stanford neuroscientist, has made this point repeatedly. Hydrate first, caffeinate second. The practice itself is unglamorous. Warm water in a glass, warm, not chilled. A small pinch of sea salt, a squeeze of lemon. The warmth eases the digestive system awake rather than shocking it. The salt returns sodium and magnesium spent overnight, and magnesium is involved in regulating cortisol. The lemon supplies vitamin C, and researchers at the University of Alabama reported that a 500 milligram dose blunted cortisol spikes following a stressful task. That was a controlled laboratory setting, not a weight loss trial, and it is worth holding the two apart. 2 minutes, 1 glass. Second is morning light. The practice is 5 to 10 minutes outside within the first half hour of waking, with the light reaching the eyes directly, not filtered through a window, not a screen. The reason is that light is the master signal for the circadian clock, and that clock is not only about sleep. It governs hunger signaling, metabolic timing, and cortisol rhythm together. Sachin Panda at the Salk Institute has worked on this for decades, and his findings associate disrupted circadian rhythm with higher cortisol and more visceral fat. The sequence he describes runs forward through the day. Morning light supports serotonin production. Serotonin is the precursor the body converts to melatonin after dark. More melatonin is associated with deeper sleep, and deeper sleep is associated with a calmer cortisol rise the following morning. It is a chain of associations rather than a single proven lever, and the researchers working on it are careful to say so. In Japan, the morning walk is called sanpo, and the light exposure is simply built into it, long before anyone measured why it helped. Third is MA, which translates roughly as the interval, the deliberate pause between things. Applied to the morning, the practice is to let coffee wait about 90 minutes. This is the step people argue with. So here is the mechanism. Huberman's account of it runs like this. While you sleep, a molecule called adenosine builds up in the brain, and adenosine settling into its receptors is what sleepiness physically feels like. Caffeine does not clear adenosine out of you. It parks itself in those same receptors, so the adenosine circulating in your system has nowhere to dock, and you stop registering how tired you actually are. It has not gone anywhere. It keeps accumulating behind the blockade. When the caffeine finally clears in the early afternoon, all of it finds its receptors at once. That is the 2 o'clock crash, and a crash reads to the body as a stress event, which raises cortisol and produces a fairly reliable craving for sugar. Huberman delays his own caffeine by 90 to 120 minutes on the same reasoning. The coffee is not canceled, it is just moved to where the mechanism is no longer working against it. Fourth is Sanpo, the walk. This one runs against most fitness advice, which treats intensity as the variable that matters. For general fitness, that holds. First thing in the morning, during the cortisol peak, it does not. The Journal of Endocrinological Investigation has published work finding that a hard morning session can keep cortisol elevated for hours afterwards. The endorphins are real, and they arrive quickly, which is exactly why the cost is easy to miss. The alternative is 20 to 30 minutes of unhurried walking, and there is a specific reason it is walking and not a stationary bike. Stanford researchers have described an effect called optic flow. When you move forward and the world slides past you on both sides, that visual pattern is associated with reduced activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. Think of the amygdala as a smoke alarm. A sensitive one keeps the whole system on alert, and cortisol stays up with it. This is also why walking on a machine facing a wall is not the same thing. The scenery has to move. Fifth is seijaku, stillness. It is the one almost nobody keeps, and arguably the one that carries the most weight. The practice is to leave the phone alone for the first half hour after waking. No feed, no headlines, no inbox. What happens when you pick it up is that a nervous system still booting gets handed several dozen unrelated demands at once, each one a small dopamine hit and a small stress signal. You go from resting to reactive in under a minute before you have eaten anything or seen daylight. Anna Lemke, the Stanford psychiatrist who wrote Dopamine Nation, describes how an early spike like this resets your baseline upward and holds it there until bedtime, so that ordinary things feel flatter and it takes more input to feel level. More input in practice tends to mean more stress. Seijaku means quiet, calm, the absence of noise. The idea is that the first half hour belongs to you rather than to everyone who messaged you overnight. You would not open 50 tabs before the operating system had finished loading. So, 5. Water before coffee. Daylight within the first half hour. Caffeine delayed by about 90 minutes, a walk instead of a hard session, and the phone left alone until your system has actually come online. Notice what is absent from that list. Nothing costs money. Nothing needs a gym, a subscription, an app, or a supplement. Nothing on it is a treatment, and none of it is medical advice. And if something about your body genuinely worries you, that conversation belongs with a doctor, not a video. What the research does suggest is more interesting than a promise anyway. If the first hour after waking really does set a tone the rest of the day inherits, then the question stops being how much discipline you can summon and starts being what you are asking your body to do in the minutes after you wake.